Hello. Hi. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Kara.
Hi.
Going. Y'all made it. Well, thank you for being here. Just letting more people in. How are y'all doing today? Doing good?
Doing good, girl. Watching baseball.
Oh, right. It's baseball season. I know. It's awesome. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your Wednesday evening, wherever you're at. I'm really excited about today. Before we dive in, I want to start with something really simple. Um, that we're all here as athletes, we're all part of the ACB community, and so I just know that there's a lot of overlap in the things that we experience, the things that we've shared, and there's been so many times I've thought about how can we create some conversations around this. So I thought it would be great to let um, let this be a beginning. Let this be the start. So I'm going to share my screen here if you can already see it. Can you see my screen? Yes? Okay, awesome. Great. Well, where is everybody from? Maybe we could put in the chat. Where are y'all from? Where is everyone dialing in from? Hi, Nicole. Because I know we're like from all over. Alberta, Canada. Wow, Kansas, South Carolina, Texas. Wow, you all look from all over. It's awesome. Alabama. How cool is this? Hi, Kristen from Louisville, Kentucky. Bay Area, yes. Sacramento, Georgia. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Sacramento, everybody. So we can see we're a very diverse group. We're from all over the country and also Canada. So that's great to see you all here. So before we dive in, I just want to start with my own why I'm doing this because not that long ago, I remember walking out of the gym where everything went perfectly. I finished my routine, I stayed disciplined, I did everything right. And on the drive home, I caught myself thinking it should have been better. And that moment is actually what this conversation is about today. So just take a breath with me and arrive here because I know how you usually show up. Focused, disciplined, already thinking about what's next. And today I want this to be a little different. We're here to talk about a very specific kind of transformation, not just becoming a better athlete, but becoming someone who feels different inside their own experience. Because you can look strong on the outside and still feel pressure on the inside. You can still be progressing and still feel like it's not landing. Right? You can be doing everything right and still question yourself. So just notice, have you ever felt that? Because that's where this conversation begins. Because most of you don't have a discipline problem. If anything, you've mastered discipline. You know how to show up, you know how to push, you know how to stay consistent. But there's another layer that no one ever taught you. And that's what we're going to work on today. For those of you who I have not met me, I'm Dr. Kaur Rattu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and high performance coach and NPC competitor, working towards that pro card too, as many of you. And I serve as faculty with Stanford Psychiatry's YogaX program, where we study the intersection of neuroscience, stress, and human performance. And I've spent years working with high performing women, athletes, leaders, professionals who look incredibly capable on the outside, but internally are navigating pressure, perfectionism, and that constant sense of, I could be better. And I'm not separate from this. I'm in this world right with you. I train, I push, I understand the standards you hold yourself to, which is why I care so deeply about this part of the work. Because what I've seen over and over again is that the next level of performance is not unlocked by doing more. It's unlocked by experiencing yourself differently while you're doing it. So today we're going to go deeper than mindset. We're going to talk about how your nervous system shapes your confidence, how your identity shapes your performance, and why confidence is not something you chase. It's something you learn to stabilize. And so my intention for our session today is simple, that you don't just leave with insight, that you leave with a shift in how you think, how you feel, and how you experience yourself. Because when that changes, everything changes. So take one more breath with me. And let's redefine what it actually means to be powerful. So let me describe something. And just notice if this feels familiar to you. You pour everything into your craft, the discipline, the structure, the consistency, and you show up even when you don't feel like it. You hold yourself to a high standard, and you care about doing this very deeply well. And from the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You're strong, you're committed, you're progressing, but internally, there's another experience. Moments where you question yourself, moments where you compare, moments where you wonder if you're doing enough or being enough. And sometimes, even when you're improving, even when you're objectively doing well, it still doesn't fully land. There's this quiet, persistent feeling like I should be further along, I could be better, I'm still not enough. And what I want you to know right here is that this experience is not a personal failure. It's a pattern that high performing women, especially in fitness, experience all the time. But almost no one talks about this directly. And this is one of the biggest barriers between being an athlete and becoming an icon. Because if your internal experience is unstable, your confidence will always feel conditional. So today, we're not going to push past this. We're going to understand it. And more importantly, we're going to change your relationship to it. So we just named that feeling, that quiet, persistent sense of it's still not enough. So let me ask you something. How many of you have ever thought, I just need more confidence. I just need to be better. I just need to push a little harder. Maybe you can put a yes in the chat or any of those. Just take a moment, notice for yourself. Does that feel true? Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So many of you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and honesty, because I want us to see that we're all in it together. To normalize this experience. So now let me ask you this. Are you already disciplined? Do you already show up when you don't feel like it? Do you already hold yourself to a high standard? Yes, probably all of you, right? So discipline isn't the problem. In fact, discipline is every one of you, it's your superpower. You already know how to show up, stay consistent, and do hard things. So if it's not discipline, then what's actually going on? Because what I see over and over again with high performing women is not a lack of effort. It's something more subtle. It's an unstable internal experience, and it shows up like this. Just notice if you recognize any of these. You feel confident until something shifts. You feel good until you see someone else. You hit a goal and almost immediately move the target. So you're constantly evaluating, how am I doing? Am I enough? Am I where I should be? And again, just notice, is that familiar? And here's the truth, right? That's not confidence. That's your nervous system tying your worth to your outcomes. So when things go well, you feel up. But when they don't, you feel that immediately as well. And no matter how much you achieve, it never quite stabilizes. Now, here's the part I really want you to hear. Not it's this is not because you're doing something wrong. This is because no one ever taught you how to work with this. You were taught how to train, how to follow a plan, how to stay disciplined, but no one taught you how to regulate your internal state, how to stabilize your confidence, how to build an identity that doesn't collapse under pressure. So what do we all do? We try to fix an internal problem with more external effort, more training, more control, more pressure. And for a while, that actually works until it doesn't, right? So today we're going to stop trying to outwork this and start trying to understand it, because once you see the pattern correctly, you don't have to stay stuck in it. So now that we've named the pattern, we have to shift how we understand it, because most people will tell you this is just mindset, or think more positively, be more confident. But I want to be very clear with you. This is too simplistic, because this is not just a mindset problem. This is a nervous system and identity problem. And once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. So let me break this down simply. Your nervous system, which is the command center of the body, it's constantly scanning your environment. It's always looking for a threat and for safety. And so what happens is it's a scanning. Am I safe? Am I okay? Where do I stand? And in high performing environments like fitness and bodybuilding, your system learns something very quickly. I'm safer when I'm improving. So what happens is you tell yourself progress equals safety and stagnation equals threat. So even when nothing is actually wrong, your body can feel restless, on edge, not enough, or like you need to do more. Not because you're failing, but because your system is activated. Now layer identity on top of that. Because if your sense of self is built around how I look, how I perform, how I compare, then your identity becomes unstable, because those things are always changing, right? So now you have a nervous system that only feels safe when you're improving, and an identity that's tied to outcomes. That combination creates constant pressure. So of course your confidence fluctuates. It's not designed to stabilize in that system, right? So just notice for yourself, like, does that start to click? Right. So this is why surface level fixes don't work, right? You can't think your way out of something that your body is experiencing as a threat. And you can't build stable confidence without it. You can't build that stable confidence on an identity that's constantly being evaluated. So we're trying to move beyond that surface level solutions and trying to get to the root, because once you understand this, you stop blaming yourself. And that's where you start creating real confidence. So you don't become confident by thinking differently, you become confident by becoming safe to yourself. Okay. So I hope this is resonating so far, because Because today isn't just about insight, it's about giving you something you can actually use. So in your training, in your mindset, and also in how you experience yourself. So here's what we're going to do together. First, we're going to break the comparison loop, not by telling yourself, stop comparing, but by understanding why your mind goes there and how to shift out of it in real time. Because right now, comparison is quietly draining your energy and redirecting your focus away from yourself. So second, we're going to look at perfectionism, not in a way that you've heard before, because most high performers don't want to let go of perfectionism, right? They're afraid that if they do, they'll lose their edge. So we're going to do something different. We're going to separate excellence from self-pressure so that you can still perform at a high level. I still want that for us. Like, we're not going to slack here. We're still high performers. We're not taking that away, but we're going to do that without constantly feeling like you're falling short. And then third, and this is the most important, is that we're going to build a foundation for stable confidence, not confidence that spikes when things are going well and disappears the moment something shifts, but confidence that holds across progress, across plateaus, across wins, and also across setbacks. So I want you to pause here for a moment. What would it feel like to experience your journey from that place? Because that's the shift we're moving towards. And all of this leads to something deeper. Moving from being someone who's constantly chasing to someone who's embodying. From reacting to leading yourself. From being an athlete to becoming an icon. And by the end of the today, my goal is that you don't just understand this concept, you start to feel what that version of you is really like. So let's come back to you, because I really want us to understand this. Because we have to understand the kind of person you are, right? Because this isn't random. There's a reason every one of you are here today. There's a reason you're drawn to this work. You're not average in how you approach things, right? You're someone who shows up, who follows through, who holds a high standard and pushes yourself to grow. So there's a level of discipline and precision and control in each of you that most people don't have, right? Otherwise they would be here too. And that's not something to fix. That's actually your strength. That is your edge. But that same wiring has another side. The part of you that pushes is also the part that can become relentless in a not so good way. The part of you that strives for excellence is also the part that can become self-critical. The part of you that holds high standards can also create constant internal pressure. So now you're living in both experiences, right? On one side, you're strong, capable, driven. And on the other side, you're evaluating, questioning, you're feeling like it's still not enough. So just for a moment, can you feel both of those in you? This is what I call the high performer paradox. The very traits that make you exceptional are the same traits that can quietly wear you down, not because there's something wrong with you, but because no one taught you how to work with this wiring. So instead of it working for you, it starts working against you. And this is where many high-performing women get stuck, because the solution isn't to get rid of your drive, it's to refine your relationship to it so that you can keep your edge without living in constant pressure. Because if this isn't understood, it leads you into a very specific pattern, right? A pattern that looks like progress on the outside, but feels exhausting on the inside, right? And that's what we're going to look at next. Is your drive isn't the problem, your relationship to it might be. So there's a very specific pattern that high performing athletes fall into, and it's called the performance identity trap. And it sounds like, if I look better, I feel more confident. If I improve, I'll finally feel good about myself. If I win, then I'll feel worthy. So just notice, have you ever had that version of you or that thought? And on the surface, like, that makes sense, right? Because you've been taught that confidence comes from results. But here's the problem. That kind of confidence is fragile because it's built on something that's always changing, right? Your physique changes, your performance fluctuates. There's always someone new, someone better, something more. So your confidence is constantly rising and falling based on something that you can't fully control. And that's not stability, that's dependency. And this is where it creates a loop, an external validation loop, where you're constantly asking, how did I do? How do I look? Where do I stand? And your sense of worth starts to follow these answers, because when things go well, you feel good. And when they don't, you feel it immediately. So just take a moment and notice if that feels familiar. This is why it can feel so exhausting, because you're not just working on your body, you're unknowingly putting your self-worth on the line every time. And that's a very unstable place to live from, right? And it's not because you're weak, but because the system itself is unstable. So the goal is, it's not to stop performing, it's not to stop caring. It's to uncouple your identity from your outcomes. Because when those two are fused, your confidence will always be at risk. But when they're separated, something very different becomes possible. A kind of confidence that doesn't collapse when things fluctuate. And that leads to something, something else very important. Because if confidence isn't coming from results, then where does it actually come from? Right? If your confidence is built on results, right, it'll always be at risk. And so this brings us to this core truth, right? And I want you to really pause with this one. Because if your confidence depends on outcomes, it will always fluctuate. Because think about what that means. Every win, every loss, every good day, every off day is now determining how you feel about yourself. So one moment you feel confident and the next you're questioning everything. Not because you changed, but because the outcome did, right? And that's not stability, that's volatility. And over time, that becomes exhausting because you're constantly trying to regain a feeling that was never stable to begin with. So just notice for a moment, have you ever experienced that swing? Maybe where one good week feels like I'm back, right? I got it. And then one off moment feels like, what am I even doing? That pattern is what keeps so many high performers stuck, because it looks like motivation on the outside, but internally it feels like pressure. And this is the part I want to be very clear about. That's not power, right? Power is not reactive. Power is not fragile. Power doesn't disappear in the moment something shifts. Real power is stable. And if your confidence is constantly rising and falling, it becomes hard to perform consistently and even harder to feel while you're doing it. So this brings us to a very important distinction, because not all confidence is the same. There's the kind that fluctuates and the kind that holds. And so this is what we're going to look at next, right? Is what actually creates stable confidence. So we can make a very important distinction because not all confidence is the same. There's actually two very different types of confidence, and most people are only ever taught one. So the first is what I call achievement confidence. This is the kind of confidence that comes from results. When things are going well, you feel good. When you look the way you want, you feel confident. When you hit a goal, you feel validated. But here's the reality. That kind of confidence is temporary, it's unstable, and it's easily shaken because it's tied to something that's always changing. So you're constantly trying to recreate the conditions that allow you to feel confident, and that's what becomes exhausting. Now, there's another kind of confidence that almost no one teaches, which is identity confidence. And this is not based on what you achieve. It's based on who you are, who you believe yourself to be. It's internal, it's stable, it holds even when things fluctuate. So instead of asking, how am I doing? You start relating to yourself from, I know who I am. And that creates something very different. Right? Because you can still care, you can still perform, you can still pursue excellence, but your sense of self is no longer on the line every time. So just notice as you look at this, which one have you been relying on? Because most high performers have been trained to live almost entirely in achievement confidence. And that's why it never quite stabilizes. Now, let's bring this into your actual environment because what you're navigating is not neutral, right? You're training in a space that's built on evaluation. You're seen, you're assessed, you are compared, right? That's kind of the nature of our sport, right? Visually, constantly, every pose, every physique, every performance, there's always some level of where do I stand? And over time, your system adapts to that because comparison doesn't just become something you do, it becomes something your brain is trained to do. So even when you're not on stage, even when you're just scrolling, your mind is scanning, am I ahead? Am I behind? Do I measure up? So just notice how automatic that is. And here's the important part, right? That pattern is not random. It's being reinforced over and over again by your environment. So if you've ever felt like, I know I shouldn't compare, but I still do, it's not because you lack discipline. It's because you're in a system that rewards comparison. And that makes building internal stable confidence much more challenging because now your attention is constantly pulled outward instead of anchored inward. And the more outward your focus becomes, the more unstable your internal experience feels. So this comparison loop isn't just a habit, it's a conditioned pattern. And if we don't understand it, we keep trying to fight it at the surface, right? Instead of changing what's driving it. So which brings us to something really important because this isn't just psychological, it's physiological. What's happening in your nervous system is it's shaping how you experience all of this. And so once you understand that, you stop trying to force your way out of comparison and you learn how to shift. Yeah, you learn how to shift out of it because you're not weak for comparing. You've been conditioned to do that. So let's go one layer deeper because this part is important. Comparison, it's not just something that happens in your thoughts. It's something that happens in your body. And your body doesn't experience comparison as neutral. And so many of you may understand this, right? It experiences it as a threat. So when you see someone ahead of you, when you feel like you're falling behind, your nervous system reacts as if something is wrong, not logically, but biologically. And in that moment, your system shifts into a stress response. Your body releases cortisol, your attention narrows, your system becomes more reactive because now you're in survival brain, because your brain is interpreting I'm not where I should be as I'm not safe. So just pause and notice how often that might be happening. And what does that create? You might feel more urgency, more pressure, more self-criticism, not because you're weak, but because your system is activated. And when your nervous system is in that state, you don't feel grounded, you don't feel steady, you don't feel confident, you feel like you need to fix something fast. And that's why comparison feels so draining, because it's not just a thought that you're having, it's a full body experience. It pulls you out of your center and into reactivity. And over time, that becomes exhausting because you're constantly operating from pressure and urgency and low level threat. That's not power, that's depletion. So comparison doesn't just affect how you think, it changes how your entire system functions. And when your energy is being pulled in that direction, something very specific starts to happen. You begin trying to escape that feeling. And that leads to a pattern that looks like motivation on the outside, but is actually being driven by something very different, right? Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between being behind and being unsafe. So let's take this one step further, because this doesn't just happen to amateurs. It doesn't just happen to beginners or people who are struggling. This happens at every level. Even the most elite athletes, the ones that you look at and think they've made it, they're confident, they must feel secure, right? These high-level pros that we're looking at, Laura Lee, Janet Leong, whoever your idol is, they are all still thinking, I'm not lean enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not ready enough. Just notice that. I'm thinking of a client I worked with. She was an athlete in her late 30s, incredibly disciplined, very high performing in her career, even as an athlete. She had built her entire life around structure. Her training was dialed in. Her nutrition was precise. She didn't miss sessions. She was the kind of person other people looked at and thought, wow, she's so consistent. She has so much control. But internally, it was a very different experience for her. She described waking up already evaluating herself. She'd get up, look in the mirror, and start scanning for what needed to change. So going into her workouts, even thinking, is this enough? Am I doing this right? Should I be further along by now? And even on her good days, the days where everything went well, it didn't fully land. Like she told me, I'll have a great workout, hit everything perfectly, and on the drive home, I'm already thinking about what I need to fix. And then she hit a major goal that she had been working towards for months. And she said something that really stayed with me. She said, I thought I would finally feel proud of myself, but within days, it just felt normal. And then I started to think about what I still need to do to fix this, how I need to fix myself. So we slowed it down together, and what became clear was this. Her confidence was never stabilizing because the target kept moving. The moment she reached one level, her mind had already created the next. So she never got to experience that I did it, only what's next, what's missing, what could be better. How many of you have experienced that? You can put in the chat, like, yes, maybe some of you have, right? Yeah, 100, right, Isabel? Absolutely, right? So this is, and I've experienced it myself. This is also, I do this work professionally, but it's also my lived experience as an athlete, just like you. So this isn't about where you are, it's about the system that you're operating in, because in this space, the target is always moving, right? Like you improve and your brain recalibrates. Yeah. Mary Jo, yeah. Arnold and Jen, that they told you to stay present. Yep. So instead of feeling like you've arrived, maybe you feel like you're still catching up, right? And that's not because you're doing something wrong, but it is because the goalpost literally keeps moving. But when your confidence is tied to that, you're placed in this constant state of striving and adjusting and chasing, and nothing truly ever stabilizes. So now the question becomes, how do you begin to step out of this? Not in theory, but in real time, because comparison, it's going to show up. Like, so that's not the goal, to completely eliminate it. The goal is to change your relationship to it. And it starts with a very simple shift. So instead of asking, am I better than her? You shift to, am I better than I was? Now, I want to be very clear, right? This isn't about lowering your standards. You're not becoming less driven. You're not becoming less ambitious. You're changing the metric. Because when your standard is external, your confidence will fluctuate. But when your standard becomes internal, something begins to stabilize. So now your focus shifts from where do I rank to am I growing? From do I measure up to am I aligned with my own process? And that does something powerful. It brings your attention back to you, because comparison, as you know, it pulls you outward, but growth, it grounds you inward. So just pause for a moment. How different would your experience feel if your focus wasn't consistently, on your own trajectory? I'm sorry, if your focus was on your own trajectory, because this is where real power starts to build, right? Not from outperforming others, but from becoming deeply connected to your own progress, which is such a beautiful thing. Once you start going on this journey inward, it's just you feel the power, you feel the integrity, because true confidence comes from an inner knowing. It comes from integrity, because you know who you are and you know what you do behind the scenes. So if we're to build on that shift, because comparison doesn't just distract you, it drains your power. Every time your attention moves outward, you're giving your energy away. But when your attention comes back to your own process, your growth, your standards, something very different happens. You start to build power, not the kind of power that spikes, but the kind that actually holds. Because now your experience isn't dependent on what someone else is doing, how someone else looks, or someone else is. It's anchored in, am I showing up the way I said I would? Am I growing? Am I aligned with my own standard? And that creates something incredibly stabilizing, because you're no longer being pulled in multiple directions. Yes, Jackie, alignment over everything. Yes. So even here, just take a moment. How different would it feel to move through your training from that place? Right? So this isn't about ignoring other people. You're still aware, right? You're still in the environment, but you're no longer defined by it. You're prioritizing your own development over constant external validation. And that's what we call in psychology the internal locus of control, which simply means your experience is being shaped more by you than by what's happening around you. And when that strengthens, your confidence becomes way harder to shake because it's not fragile anymore. It's not reactive. It's self-led. And this shift from external comparison to internal standards is the foundation of stable confidence, right? It's the bedrock, right? Now, all right, let's talk about the one that almost everyone in this room is holding on to, perfectionism. Now, let me ask you, how many of you have told yourself at some point, this is why I'm successful? This is what keeps me sharp. This is what gives me my edge. I hear that all the time. And I'm going to say something that might feel a little uncomfortable. That's not entirely true. Because what most people call perfectionism is actually exhaustion in disguise. It looks like discipline on the outside, but internally it feels like pressure and tension and never quite getting there. It's that voice that says, that was good, but it could have been better. You should have done more. You're not where you need to be, even when you did everything right. So just notice, does that voice show up for you? Because perfectionism doesn't let you land, right? It doesn't let you feel, great job, I'm proud of myself. That was enough for today. It just moves the bar again and again and again. And over time, that becomes heavy because you're not just training your body, you're carrying constant internal pressure. And the truth is that that's not sustainable. It drains your energy. It also disconnects you from enjoyment, right? This should be fun. This whole experience should be fun, but it's not fun anymore when we're constantly in this striving for perfection. And perfectionism actually doesn't create your success. It quietly erodes your experience of it. Now, let's make this really clear because this is where high performers get confused. So we just expose the lie of perfectionism, right? It's just exhaustion in disguise. So now we need to understand the difference between what actually supports your performance and what quietly drains it. Because these two things, they can look very similar, but internally they feel completely different. So on one side, you have high standards, and on the other side, you have perfectionism. And they're not the same. So let's break it down. So high standards are rooted in growth, precision, and discipline. So they sound like, I want to improve, I care about doing this well, and I'm committed to the process. So they feel focused and grounded and intentional. They push you forward without tearing you down. Now, perfectionism is rooted in something very different. It's rooted in fear and shame and that underlying belief of I'm not enough yet. So it sounds like that wasn't good enough. You should have done more. You're behind. And even when you did well, it feels like pressure and tension and never quite landing. So just notice, okay, like if you can feel the difference between these two, right? One expands you and the other constricts you. One builds energy, the other drains it. So high standards refine your performance, but perfectionism punishes you into it. And again, you do not need perfectionism to be excellent. In fact, your performance, and we know this from research, is usually better without it. Because when you remove internal pressure, you gain clarity, focus, and consistency, and your system can actually stabilize. So this isn't about lowering your bar. It's about removing what's weighing you down so that you can actually meet that bar and from a more grounded place, right? Because a lot of athletes rely on structure to hold them, right? We've got prep, we've got deadlines and clear expectations. So the question becomes, what happens when that structure fades? Because excellence is driven by intention, right? And perfectionism is driven by fear. So this is where what really hits for a lot of athletes, the off season. Because up until this point, you've had structure. You had a plan, you had a timeline, a clear direction, and you know what you're working towards. You know what progress looks like. And then that structure starts to shift. Your body changes, the visual feedback changes, the external validation decreases, right? Maybe you're posting less or people are not commenting the way they were. And then suddenly you're left with a very different experience. You have less certainty, less structure, and more internal noise. And this is where I hear a question that comes up over and over again. Who am I if I'm not stage lean? And I want you to really feel the weight of that question, because that's not just about your body. That's about identity. It reveals how much of your sense of self has been tied to a specific version of you, a version of you that's controlled, refined, validated. So when that shifts, it can feel like something is missing, not because you've lost yourself, but because your identity was anchored externally. So just notice, have you ever felt that transition? Yeah. Thank you, Kristen. Yeah. And Jamie. Yep. This is hopefully resonating for a lot of you, right? Because just where you look like the same person, like outside on the outside, but internally even maybe something different. You're maybe like people don't really notice that your body's changed that much, but you do. So you're starting to feel less confident, more critical, and that's what happens when identity is tied to state. So instead of something more stable. And this is where a lot of athletes become the most vulnerable, because they try to solve this by controlling more, restricting more, and pushing harder, and trying to get back to the version of themselves that felt more certain. But what if the goal isn't to go back? What if the goal is to become someone who feels stable in all phases, not just when everything is dialed in, but also when things are changing? Because that's where real power lives, right? It's not in a specific look, but in a stable sense of self. And this brings us to a deeper question. It's like, what if ambition itself needs to be reframed, right? Because at this point, some of you might be thinking, okay, but if I let go of this pressure, am I going to lose my edge? And so let me be very clear. You do not need less ambition. Your ambition is not the problem. Your drive, your discipline, your desire to grow, that part of you is what makes you exceptional. So we're not removing that. What we are doing is separating your ambition from the self-punishment that often fuels it. Because for many high performers, ambition isn't clean, right? It's tied to, I'm not enough yet. I need to prove something. I cannot slow down. So it creates this internal dynamic where you're pushing forward while also being pulled down by your own thoughts. And that is exhausting. So just notice, has your drive ever felt like pressure instead of power? Because there is a difference, right? There's ambition that comes from clarity and intention and self-respect. And then there's ambition that comes from fear and urgency and self-criticism. One is sustainable and the other one burns you out. And this isn't about being soft, it's about being strategic, right? Strategic with your energy, with your attention, with your nervous system. Because when your system is regulated, you do not lose your edge. You actually sharpen it. You become more focused, more consistent, more powerful under pressure. And so the shift is, instead of I have to push myself to be better, you move into I lead myself to be better. That's a completely different experience. That's self-leadership. And that's what sets the stage for the transformation we've been building towards, right? So this brings us to the core of everything we've been building towards. Like, this is a shift that changes everything. We're not just talking about improving your mindset or optimizing your performance. We're talking about something much deeper, which is an identity shift, moving from being an athlete to becoming an icon. And what I want to be very clear, like, this is not about a title. It's not about status or followers or recognition. It's about how you experience yourself. Because an athlete is in constant relationship with performance and results and evaluation. There's a level of reacting to what's happening externally. But an icon is anchored differently. There's a presence, a groundedness, a sense of self that does not fluctuate with every outcome. They still perform, they still care, they still pursue excellence, but they're not defined by it. So if you take a moment, can you feel the difference between these two? Because this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about accessing a different way of being that's already available to you, right? A part of you that's less reactive, more grounded, more self-led. So let's make this distinction really clear, because this is the shift we've been building towards the entire time, right? On one side, you have an athlete. And again, there's nothing wrong. We're all athletes, right? That's where most people start. But the athlete is primarily outcome driven. So their focus is on results, performance, how things are going. So they're constantly comparing, evaluating, and adjusting. And because of that, their confidence tends to fluctuate, right? So when things go well, they feel good. When things shift, they feel it immediately. So they end up in the cycle of chasing and proving and seeking validation. Now, on the other side, you have the icon. And the icon operates from something different, because they are identity driven. Their focus is not just on what am I achieving, but on who am I being while doing this. They're grounded in their presence. They still perform, they still pursue excellence, but their confidence is stable. It doesn't collapse every time something changes, because it's not built on outcomes, right? It's built on identity. So instead of chasing validation, they lead from within. And that creates a completely different experience. They move differently. They carry themselves differently. They respond differently under pressure. So which one feels most familiar to you right now? You know, which one feels like the version of you that you are now, and maybe one that you're ready to step into? Because this isn't just about winning, it's about how you show up in your life, right? It's about creating consistency and presence and impact. Because athletes chase results, but icons create impact. And that's like the real difference here, right? Because validation is external. It comes from judges, from feedback, results, other people's opinions. And because of that, it's always changing. It's temporary, it's unpredictable. It's not in your control. But when your confidence is built around validation, you're constantly trying to secure something that can shift at every moment. Now, impact is something very different, right? Impact is internal first. It comes from how you show up, how you lead yourself, how you carry your energy. It's something you generate. And because of that, it's stable, it's consistent, it builds over time. And you get to control, how you respond, how you lead yourself. So here, ask yourself, what would shift for me if I moved from do they approve of me to how do I show up with impact today? Because that changes your entire experience. Because identity is not something you think, it's something you feel. It's something your body learns. It shapes how you carry yourself, how you walk into a room, how you hold eye contact, how you speak, even to yourself. Like before you even say a word, your identity is already being expressed, right? And we can all feel that. People can feel that. But more importantly, you can feel that. Because the version of you that feels rushed or uncertain or like you need to prove something moves very differently than the version of you that's grounded and self-led and certain in who you are. So just notice if you can feel the difference between those states, right? So now we bring this into you. We've talked about the shift from athlete to icon. We've talked about identity. We've talked about how that shapes your presence. But I want you to do something different. I don't want you to think about this. I want you to feel this. So just take a moment, let your body settle. You drop your shoulders, soften your jaw, take a breath, and imagine this. If you already believed fully that you were that version of you, that icon, that grounded, self-led, unshakable version of you, how would you move this week? How would you walk into your training? How would you speak to yourself on a day when things don't go perfectly? How would you respond when comparison shows up? Just sit with that for a moment. Because notice that version of you is not more intense. She's not more pressured. She's more certain. She's more grounded. She's more self-trusting. And that changes everything. Because confidence is not just something you think, it's something your body experiences. It's in your posture, in your breath, in your tone, your energy. So this is not hypothetical. This is an invitation to begin practicing that version of you today, right now. Not when you reach a goal, not when things are perfect, but right now. Because the more you embody it, the more natural it becomes and the more stable your confidence feels. Right? Now, I know we're pretty much at time, but I just want you to just continue to integrate this work because when you begin to stabilize your identity and regulate your nervous system and shift how you relate to yourself, you're no longer just participating in this sport, you transcend it, right? You don't just perform, you lead. You don't just show up, you influence. Because now your presence is different. It's not coming from pressure, it's not coming from proving. So you felt the shift, right? I know this was kind of fast, and an hour goes by very quickly. But this work is not meant to be done alone. And we're very privileged, that we actually have each other. We have this community. And there's something incredibly powerful about being in a space with other women who are choosing to think differently and show up differently. Women who understand this journey, right? The discipline, the pressure, the expectations, they're lived. So if this resonated, I'd love to stay connected with you. You can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn, where I share more on confidence, nervous system work, high performance, anxiety, identity, and more importantly, where we continue this conversation, because this is not a one-time insight, it's a practice. And before we close, I want to leave you with something practical, because this work is not just something you understand, it's something you practice. They're not just ideas. So I've created a set of free actionable tools for you. If you go to my website, they're not just ideas, but things that you can actually use. So you'll find, nervous system resets to bring you back to your body. There's mental fitness frameworks you can download, burnout recovery tools. And these are the exact principles we talked about today, right? Just that, and just start there. My website is drminnie.co. I'd love to stay connected. Just email me or message me or DM me, whatever feels easiest. And before we close, I just want to leave you with this. That power is not what most people think it is. It's not about being the loudest in the room. It's not about proving something. It's not about having external bravado. Real power is much quieter than that. It's regulated. It's the ability to stay grounded. And when things don't go your way, it's the ability to stay steady and calm that comes from within. It's not something you perform. It's something you embody. And so I just want to say thank you all so much. This work is extremely powerful, and it means a lot to me for you all to be here. Thank you so much for your time, and I know that we are at time, so if you have questions, please send me a message. I'm always active on Instagram, or you can just message me on my website. Right. I will leave some time open. I'm still here. If anyone has any final thoughts or questions, I'm more than open to share. You can just turn on your video or unmute yourself if you have anything you'd like to say. Sharing. All of you will also get the replay, and I'll send out the slides for registering today as well, just so you have that. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your evening, and I hope to see you all soon somewhere, maybe at a fashion show or next competition somewhere. I'm based in San Diego, so if you're out here, give me a call. All right, take care. Have a good rest of your night.